Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm happy to see so many of you here today, and welcome to the Symposium of this morning of Equity in Learning Systems, making a case for multilingual testing. We have 4 presentations for today, a short summary or discussion at the end of the block, and we are looking for your questions at the end of the symposium. So,
good morning, and thank you for getting out of bed and coming to see us. We were a bit worried a few minutes ago there was nobody in the room. To be honest, we weren't that worried. We would have talked to each other for another while. The eagle-eyed among you will realize that the title that you're looking at there is not the same as the title in the program. But this was probably the title that we dreamt up in Singapore when we actually put this idea together. Mina said to me, "Do you have an idea for a symposium at EALTA?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, you better hurry because it's due tomorrow." So we had 24 hours. And all these guys, I have to say, well done to everybody, because we put the whole proposal together in 24 hours. And then thank you to the people who accepted it. But I do think it's a really important topic to be addressing this morning. It's something that's run right through the conference. And I think we'll see in the morning that the range of things we can talk about when it comes to multilingualism is massive. So you're not going to get all the answers this morning. But what I do think you'll see is some of the solutions and the difficulties that people face when trying to deal with multilingual contexts. So very briefly, that's what we're going to be talking about. And the speakers will forgive me for saying, looking at what people are talking about, we see that we have some people talking about settled migrants, as I've called them. People who've moved to the country and are settled there. We have a multilingual reality of a country that is a multilingual society. How do you deal with language policy in that context, and the vagaries of it, of course. And then you have the concept of test misuse and the whole idea of what are we testing anyway. And then we have incoming migrants and how to deal with them. So just giving you a broad overview of what people are going to talk about, because we have a very full program today, and I would like to call on the lads from Israel, Anna and Elana, to come to your presentation. Thank you very much. It's great to have you here.
Hi, everybody. Surprising, so many people on Sunday morning. Good. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Barry, for organizing it and all the 24 hours, and you were very helpful in writing the abstract based on another abstract, so we ended up on kind of corrections afterwards, but it's great, and we're so happy we're here. And a great conference to all of you, really fantastic, good topics, and very interesting ideas that we're both very happy to be here. So we will talk about a study that actually was created. You have a pointer? I mean, how does it work? Like this? That's the pointer. Okay, thank you. Okay, it's not loud enough.
It's loud, but you have to stand there. Yeah.
Okay, there, here. Okay. So what we will be talking about is a study that is part of a larger project, which has to do with the Israeli government coming up one day after 20 years of lobbying, from our special issue on lobbying in advocacy in the Language Policy Journal, in case you're interested in that, which have seven papers, including Cecilie and others, about what it means to lobby and to advocate for changes in policy. So after 20 years of doing that, we managed to get a call from the government that said we want to develop a multilingual policy for the Israeli educational system. So this is what it's based on, and for me it was a great opportunity to try something that I've been working on for many years, which is the idea of multilingual assessment. And basically what you see here is what we're going to show you. And what you see here on top, you see the test in one language, in Russian. Then you see the same test in Arabic. And what we've done, which is a simple trick, really, but it worked. So here we'll tell you in a minute more about it. So, all right, so the introduction. So multilingual assessment needs to reflect multilingual reality in schools. So far, multilingual assessments have been kind of something that is not done because it's all monolingual, and this is an attempt to change it because the reality is different. There are many people, we'll mention in a minute what they do, and they speak so many languages. How come this thing doesn't enter schools? So equal opportunity to learn, of course, it's important. And for us, what was most important was the idea of content. We're not testing English as a foreign language, we're testing math, we're testing science, we're testing history, other topics, whereby if students don't do well on those topics because they don't know the language at all, those immigrants, and it's a problem, as you can imagine. But one of the things, I'm saying it already now, which is unique about this study is that we didn't do just immigrants, we did also other groups in Israel who have Hebrew as a second language, i.e. the Arabs in Israel. And because they study all in Arabic in schools, then they come to the university and it's Hebrew. But everything is in Hebrew, but basically for them, Hebrew is a second language. And what we wanted to find out really, whether the same pattern of what we found earlier with the Russians, which I'll show you in a minute, Russian immigrants, also works for minority children who grow in Israel, they're born in Israel, and still Hebrew is not their main language. So here, so this is the content is very important here, and obviously the whole idea, the home languages should be integrated, what we're saying in school. In order for the content, we have to talk about the full language repertoire. How do we bring the full language repertoire into the classroom, be it migrants or others? Because I think this is something that we always look at either migrants or people for whom second language, but here we tried both and we got kind of similar but also different results. Okay, so I'll just skip this fast and I'll tell you Israel in general, just so you know, is a multilingual country. Hebrew is the official language. Many immigrant languages, Russian, French, and a variety of languages used by asylum seekers and refugees. With the vast migration of Jews to Israel in the early 20th century, Hebrew had been invented as a spoken language again. It was always a written language, but but most people didn't know the spoken language. I'm sure you know the story. I'm just repeating it for those who don't know, because it's such one of those miracles. A country declares a new language, for everybody who are immigrants, which is kind of we're writing a lot about it, but okay, so Hebrew language has been not spoken for a time, was introduced as an official language already at the early 20th century when the British were still there. In 1923, the British accepted Hebrew as the official language in Israel, in Palestine at the time, and along with English and along with Arabic for the Arabs. Today, Hebrew is the dominant language and the medium of instruction. So I met Yigal here, and right away we start speaking Hebrew. What else would we speak? You work in English, I work in English, but that will be the common language. Yet other languages continue to exist because we have Arabic is the medium of instruction of the Arab communities that make up 20% of the populations. These are not Arabs in the territories, in the PA, the Palestinian Authority. We're talking about Arabs who stayed in Israel after 48. And then they are Israeli citizens, and they are everywhere at our universities and versus other places. So Jewish immigrants are forced into Hebrew in schools right away. No, nothing about Russian. Even in cases where 85% are Russian speakers, their language is prohibited almost in school. It's never said officially prohibited, but obviously it happens. And this is what I mentioned just now, to 2016, the Ministry of Education said, well, go ahead, do multilingual assessment, and so on. It's based on a previous multilingual suggestion that we made to the government in 1996 with the late Professor Spolsky, that we worked together to create a new, and we have a book, it's called Languages of Israel, Policy, Ideology, Practice. The call reflected the view of the officials at the Ministry for change and recognition of multilingualism. Fantastic, right? So here was, we did it in a very research-oriented language policy, which is, I'll give you an example. It's an attitude of parents and teachers towards multilingualism. It's published in MLJ 2021. Translanguaging in the English classroom. All kind of questions you can see all the way. Here, multilingual, like 6, multilingual awareness, so 5, the effect of heritage and world languages on educational systems. So we answered some of those questions, all of those questions, in fact, but we're going to focus today on question 3. Okay, so this is the multilingual testing assessment, and based on previous work we've done, which we found 9 to 11 years it takes for immigrants to manage academically in schools. Everybody can learn how to speak street language, but not, academic language. And that's a study, national study that we've done before. Something like this, you see right away. These are the Russians, and you see, this is the Israelis, and you see the Russians, they go up, and up to 9 to 10 years, they overpass, they become like native speakers in the academic language. The blue line, the purple line is Ethiopian students who come with very low literacy skills, and for them it takes forever. And sometimes I don't want to talk about this because this is the people who came in the first year, because it's done like this, not the same people, but a random sample of each group over in each year. Okay, so what we see, how do we make it short? What it means 9 to 11 years, or at all, you cannot do it at all. All right. So one of the things that came up for this study, which triggered everything else, was because we looked at all the other ways of what do you do with those people? Do you give them the home language? No, that doesn't work. We tried so many, what people like to call accommodations. I don't like the word accommodations because accommodation is free. It's artificial in a way. It's 10 minutes now? No? Okay. Oh, God. So,
Just stand there.
I have to stand there.
The limit
Okay.
for you.
All right. Okay. Those who know me, you know how much I don't like limits. Okay, thank you anyway. So one of the things that came out here is, like, you see those students who got the test in 2 languages. In other words, you had Hebrew and Russian together, did so much better than the monolingual group that got it only in Hebrew. And that was kind of, and it went up to over 12 years or so. So that kind of got the idea. Don't give them just in their home language. They don't know the home language goes down, the Hebrew goes up. What you do, people function in 2 languages, in fact. And this is the whole idea about it. You don't leave your language behind. And here, one of the things that we were asking what we were asking in this study examined the role of bilingual tests with students of different types of multilingualism. Arabs, that I already mentioned, that born in Israel and so on. Russians, and these are the 2 groups we're working on here. This is the test. This is the idea. It's 10 minutes now. Okay, I'll take half a minute more. Okay, so what you see is here. This is like Hebrew. This is Russian. This is what you get as a test. Your home language and your new language together in the test. That's all. And okay, just to show you how it works with Arabic, and these are the research questions. And let me just kind of, and we have lots of items. This kind of disappeared, but these are the tools.
The research tools.
The research tools are attitude questionnaires, tests and focus groups and think aloud protocols and so on. Every study of those 6 studies I mentioned to you, we used like 5 or 6 research tools. So immigrants, these are the immigrants, these are the Arabs, levels 9 and 10th grade, secondary school, the result, and I'll just say this result that I will talk about, and then Anna is coming in a minute. And what happened in the reading comprehension test, in the reading content in reading, basically what you see is the experimental group. That is the group that got both languages in front of them. They got an average of 15.3. Those who got the control group got only Hebrew. And look how the scores are different. There's 8 like twice as higher scores. And then we did, which Anna will talk about in a minute, some kind of, what are they doing? Because they're making sense from looking at both languages. And theoretically, I think what we came up with is very strong because it's very similar to what people do as immigrants or Arab people as well. So writing tasks were, just let me say one, also we saw differences in the writing task. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'll just say that There was one difference between people who live in what's called a homogeneous city, where only Arabs live there, and what we called in Israel a mixed towns, like Jaffa, for those who've been there. And one of the things we found was that those who lived in the homogeneous city, they needed the translation, they said that 2 languages more, because those who live in Jaffa, let's say, where it's generally, it's a heterogeneous city, they function in both languages. Okay, anyway, because it's called Tel Aviv Jaffa also. And okay, so I'm going to move now and let Anna explain some of the results and conclusions and whatever. Thank you.
So I just go back 2 slides for the results of the writing test. So we can see that we had this range from 1 to 5, and the control group, they just got 2, and the experimental group 4.5. So if you look like at a 100-point scale, the ones that got just Hebrew, they got like 40, and the ones that had both languages, they got 90. So it's a big difference for them, and now we can see some examples of their writing of the students. Again, we're talking about 9th to 10th grade students that came to Israel about 2-3 years ago, and they got the writing test just in Hebrew, and this what they write, like we didn't understand the task and stuff like this, and the writing is not good. You can see it is barely like a child in 3rd, 4th grade. And then once they had also the Russian, and they also had the option to write in the Russian language in the task. So they write much better. It's very organized, and it looks very good, and it's appropriate to their education level.
You want to show, to maybe read some of it? It's kind of how grown-ups write versus...
No,
okay, go on.
Yeah. Okay, so then we have the results of the single out. So basically, for someone that doesn't know, single out, we were sitting with the students while they were making the exam, and they had to tell us everything what they were doing during they taking the exam. And we found 3 types, which the first one, they tried to answer it in Hebrew, probably because they were so that they're expected to do so, but then they realized they understand nothing, and they just switched to Russian. The second group, the students, they were about 3 years in Israel. They used Russian to help them, and they answered the exam in Hebrew, but then when they went to the writing task, they did it in Russian. And then we have this, the third type of students that they just use the Russian language like an anchor to make sure that they understand what they have read in Hebrew. And we can see that some of the students that they did the exam in Hebrew, they performed in Hebrew, they still write the writing test in Russian because they say that they can better express their thoughts and free writing in Russian. And it's similarly with the Arab students, we also see 3 types, but they were using more Hebrew because they're used to Hebrew language in their life. And still, there was that one group, they claimed that in free expression of their thoughts and opinion, it was easier for them to use Arabic. And all of these students were from the homogeneous cities where they get education in Arabic language. Okay, so we also find some very nice findings from the focus groups. We had 8 focus groups with the Russian-speaking students, and they really like the idea of bilingual testing. We can see here that one of the students say, I think that generally it's a good thing that when some of the exams are given in 2 languages, Russian and Hebrew, because it examines your knowledge, and each student can choose the language that is easier for him. So it's good to have both languages, because then they can choose, they can have both languages there for them. And also something that this was really incredible is that they say that sometimes they can fail the exam just because of one word. They misunderstood one word, and then all the thing got wrong. And here they say that they wish the bilingual test will be implemented now so that they can benefit from it and improve their grades on the matriculation exam, which can be really hard, even for Hebrew-speaking students. Okay, and They also say that it's not only about tests, also for the education process. When they have the Russian-speaking teachers, they can mediate and translate for them during the lesson and during the test as well. We had some small group of students that they were like going to this agenda and ideology that Hebrew language is the language of Israel, so they saw that it's not appropriate to use this kind of assessment in Israel. But that was a very small group of students that they could function well in Hebrew. And also for the Arabic students, we can see similar findings. They liked the bilingual test, even though they used less the Arab language, but they were happy that they had the choice and that their language was taken into account in the education system. And they also say that they would like to have more Hebrew in the learning process because they will need it later in the higher education, which there is no Arabic language there. And they had overall a very positive opinion about these languages. And they felt that Hebrew is not a foreign and a new language for them. So they felt that their reality from the moment they was born is like bilingual. They always have the Hebrew and the Arabic there, so it was not new for them. Yeah, as I said, it's a part of their environment and life, the bilingual. So for the conclusion, results point to major advantages of multilingual testing for academic achievements, as well as for students' well-being, confidence, the right freedom to demonstrate knowledge, and not to be penalized for their being proficient enough, not being proficient enough. Okay. Okay, it's just coming out. Yes. So they received the bilingual test as very positive. We recommend the Ministry of Education to implement this multilingual assessment. And they were planning to do so before COVID, and then COVID came, and then it's still somewhere in the drawer of the Ministry of Education there. Yeah. So I just wanted to show you some small examples of the work that we have been doing already after the research. We started working with schools, and they already started implementing the thing that they use Russian and Hebrew even on the blackboard. They have it in the instructions in tests, and also for some school activities they have both languages there already, and we can see that the students feel better and they feel that they are motivated to learn, and that the education sees them, that they are not transparent, because sometimes they feel transparent because no one addressed their needs.
That's a book we wrote. We just published. All the studies are there. It came out in February, Developing Multilingual Education Policies. All the studies are there of the whole project that is still on the shelf of the ministry, right? And it's finally
Thank you.
Myself. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Mina Patel, and I work with the British Council. What I'm going to do in the next, I hope, 15 minutes is take you through the last 20 years of education policies in Malaysia and their impact on assessment. And I say the last 20 years because I have just spent 20 years in Malaysia. I moved back to the UK last July. And so for all of these changes, it was really interesting to see them firsthand as a sort of insider, because my children are Malaysian and they were part of it, but as an outsider from a British Council perspective as well. So my inspiration for this session is my grandson. His name's Ronan. He lives in Malaysia. And when Barry was conceiving of this symposium, I was thinking, you know, when he goes to school, which will be, well, he starts nursery next month, I wonder what assessment will be like for him. So on a daily basis, he's exposed to Tamil, because his father's Indian. He's exposed to Mandarin, because his mother's Chinese. He's exposed to Bahasa Malaysia, because the helper's in the house are Malay, and he's exposed to English from his granddad and me on a daily basis. So he's growing up with all of that around him. But then what he learns at school and learns through at school might be completely different. So a little bit of contextual information on Malaysia. So I'm not allowed to go beyond this, but just to say, so Malaysia has a peninsula, West Malaysia, but we also have East Malaysia, which is Borneo, so Sabah and Sarawak. Malaysia was colonised by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and then the British. I don't think that's very new. The population is interesting. We have about 34 million people, and roughly split into 60% of Malay people, 30% Chinese, and 10% Indian. So it really is a multicultural, multilingual society. And the medium of instruction in schools, a little bit complicated. So the school system, and it's a massively intricate school system, so this is really oversimplified, right? We have national schools, both for primary and secondary. In national schools, the medium of instruction is Bahasa Malaysia, okay? But then we have national type Chinese schools. The medium of education is supposed to be Mandarin. Then we have national type Tamil schools, where the medium of instruction is Tamil. However, there isn't a huge amount of monitoring that goes on in schools. So lessons in any one of these schools could be in any of the three languages. And the reason I know that is because my son went to a national type Chinese school, and sometimes he had lessons in Bahasa Malaysia, sometimes in English, and sometimes in Mandarin, depending on the teacher. My daughter went to a national school where mostly it was Bahasa Malaysia, but sometimes it was English. And when it was Bahasa Malaysia, she hardly understood anything because she speaks Mandarin and English at home. All right? But while all this is going on, there is a massive tuition industry, which is there because it is believed that the national education system does not deliver what it should do for the learners. So the tuition industry really undermines the education system. But what you have is you have children who go to school for how many hours a day, and then go to tuition for the same hours a day. And again, that tuition could be in any three of the languages, right? So a little bit crazy. So in 2002, July 2002, the government of Malaysia decided that they were going to introduce, oh, it's gone off the top of the screen, sorry, PPSMI or ETEMS. They both mean the same thing. It's the teaching of maths and science through English. ETEMS is the English acronym and PPSMI is the Malay acronym. So this was announced in July 2002. Implementation started in January 2003 to convert the teaching of two subjects from predominantly Bahasa Malaysia or Chinese or Tamil into English. So that's pretty phenomenal. And basically, the purpose was, as you can read there, to encourage students to use English and Malay in authentic situations and offer them increased and varied opportunities to be assessed and hence, sorry, there's a typo there, and hence build their confidence. So that was the purpose, right? I am going to move this way a little bit now. So, introduced in 2003, they started with the first year in primary and the first year in secondary. And then the next year, it went up the levels, right? So, in primary 6, there is a national exam. And that exam, it really is, it's a gateway. If you don't pass it, or if you don't get certain grades in certain subjects, you don't get to go to secondary school. You have to stay behind. So that's pretty important, right? PMR, over here in secondary 3, that's a national test too. And that's really important because depending on your grades on that one, you either go to the science stream, which is, the perception is it's the academic stream, or you go to the art stream, which is humanities, right? And no judgment here. Then you have SPM, which is basically heading towards your A-levels, and that's also standardized testing at national level. So a lot to work through and a lot to work towards. And these changes are happening whether anybody likes them or not. So you've got stakeholders. We all know who the stakeholders are. There are lots of them. In Malaysia, as well as learners, parents, very important stakeholders, the general public, your tuition centre owners. What are they going to do? Your publishers, your English language providers. So loads of people interested in what's happening. But then you also have the media, who are massive stakeholders, have a massive say in what happens in the country in lots of respects. So the media said that PPSMI was not good for rural children. No research done, though. So how do they know? But they didn't like it. 78% reject PPSMI, says Malay group. Nobody knows what the Chinese or the Tamil group say. Parents protesting and actually wanting it to stay and saying, we hope that this is a long-term thing, not just a short-term experiment. So you've got lots and lots of different opinions and perceptions, and it's all through the media. But then, in 2009, literally 7 years after the policy had been announced, they said, we're not going to do it anymore. And we're going to stop doing it in 2012. And the reasons they gave, the ministry, there were no tangible improvements in the level of English or in the scores achieved in the subjects, maths and science, across the board. That there were widening gaps between people of different backgrounds, so that's your rural-urban divide, but that's not only the rural-urban divide, it's also the Malay, the Chinese, the Indian divides. And then the last reason, teachers are not proficient. But difficult for teachers to become proficient when they've got 6 months to get their heads around teaching through a different language in the first instance. But again, no judgment. So, reactions to the reversal of the policy. Frustration for some people. Delight for other people. Relief. But also anger. Because who knows what's happening? Who knows whether next year people are going to change the policy again? So, decision planning implementation. When the decision was made, there was no consultation. There were people that I work with in the Ministry of Education who didn't know what was happening. The people who decided not to call a friend and ask for advice. So that didn't help. The time, I've already talked about the time, 6 months to turn a whole system around, not easy. And little or no support for educators and learners. And when I say educators, I include teachers and teacher trainers, because it was the teacher trainers who were having to put into place teacher training programs to help the teachers with the change. So this isn't rocket science, it's really basic things, but not thought about. So, oversights, these are my opinions. So, actually, it's worth saying at this point, because I am supposed to be talking about assessment. Sorry. So the assessment was quite interesting. At UPSR, so level 6 in primary, and then PMR, you could actually do your tests and exams in English and Bahasa Malay. You could choose. And the interesting thing is, as Elana was showing you 2 different papers with the Russian and the Arabic, so the tests in Malaysia was Bahasa Malay and then English underneath, right? So you had the 2 languages, which is fantastic. And interestingly, as you went through the paper, you could decide which language you chose. You answered the question in. So you could do one paper in 2 languages, depending on what the question was. So absolutely fine and great if you were good at English or Bahasa Malaysia. Yeah, if you were good at English or Bahasa Malaysia. So, what about Chinese and Tamil and the other 137 indigenous languages in Malaysia? What happened to those kids who got left behind? And learners, this constant chopping and changing of policies, nobody really thought about the learners in all of this. What was happening to their learning journeys? Okay, so that happened. In 2012, we stopped again. We went back to Bahasa Malaysia, right? And then in 2016, dual language program. Because PPSMI didn't work, but people were frustrated and angry, and the media played a part, we have the dual language program. So again, it's about empowering learners with their English, but this time, we are going to give people choices. So what the government decided with this program was that schools could choose if they wanted to do maths and science and IT through English. So in 2016, I think there were 300 schools that opted for this. But in order to opt for this, there were conditions. You had to ensure you had enough resources in terms of manpower and womanpower and teacher power to teach the subjects through English. You had to have buy-in from the principal and the teachers. It wasn't a top-down thing. You also had to have buy-in from the parents, which I think is a positive thing, a really positive thing. So parents were consulted. But the fourth condition is you still have to have levels of Malay acceptable for the Ministry of Education in order to do anything in English. So this is a choice. And the schools that opt for this, again, can do their assessments in 2 languages, not in 3 or 4, 2. But while this was happening in 2016, in 2014, before it happened, they dropped PMR. So no standardized testing at the age of 15 anymore. And then in 2021, they dropped UPSR. So again, I don't have to be tested at level 6 in primary. No national testing, which on the one hand is really good. We still have SPM, but what did they do instead? School-based assessment. Wholesale, across the country, school-based assessment, which sounds wonderful on the one hand, but no training, no support, no materials. Barry, when were we in Malaysia? 2 years ago? I think we were in Malaysia 2 years ago, Barry and I did a workshop for teachers. I think there were 120 teachers in the room from all over the country. Not one teacher had any training in school-based assessment. So, I think what I'm taking away from the last 20 years in Malaysia is that even with good intentions, and there might have been good intentions, to have assessment in 2 languages, the whole country's on a roller coaster. Yeah? The whole country's on a roller coaster of change as well. I mean, not only systemic change, but linguistic change. And it's great that you consider more than one language, but sometimes you need to consider 3 or 4 other languages too. And I've talked about this very briefly, without even mentioning the learners who have learning difficulties. And where do they come in? So this is where my interest in policy comes in, and how important it is in terms of policymakers having not only assessment literacy, but educational literacy. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, first I want to thank you, Barry, for inviting me to this symposium. We're going to stick to the focus on policy, but change the focus from children to adult migrants. So this is a third and a little bit new perspective, but I will also talk about multilingual assessment, of course. Just before I start, I want to clarify that I mean by multilingual assessment. In line, I think, with the other presenters of the symposium, I conceptualize multilingual assessment as the use of migrants' first language in the assessment of subject content. So it's not the assessment of several languages, but the assessment of content through different languages. And in this presentation, the content in focus is knowledge of society, shortened to COS, or civic knowledge, which is typically required when migrants want to settle permanently or apply for citizenship in European countries. I will divide this presentation into 3 parts. First, I will introduce the topic of COS testing for residency and citizenship, giving both a theoretical and a political background for my choice of topic. And secondly, I will talk a little bit about the benefits of multilingual teaching and assessment, which we have already heard something about. And finally, I will present the Norwegian system before and after 2017. We used to have a system which I would say was quite exemplary in terms of multilingual assessment of knowledge of society, and then it changed. And the study I will present today is part of a larger study that some of you might have heard about already, which is the Impact Project. Have anybody heard about it before? No? This is a research project that is ongoing. It's anchored at the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences in Bergen, Norway, where I work, and it's financed by the Norwegian Research Council. The project is interdisciplinary, including researchers with a background from social linguistics, second language acquisition, language testing, sociology, law and citizenship studies, philosophy, and international education. And it includes partners from Italy, the Netherlands, Greece, Belgium, the UK, and Norway. And this is our research team, our PhD students, our research assistants, and our wonderful scientific advisory board. The overall arching aim of the Impact Project is to investigate the consequences of language and cost requirements for permanent residency and citizenship on low literate adult migrants, often referred to as LESLA learners. So we investigate this question through multiple data sources ranging from large data sets of test scores linked to background variables, but also with interviews with learners with little prior schooling, with their teachers, and we also have a large international survey among teachers of this group. The Impact Project, as well as the little study that I will talk about today, is greatly inspired by the work of Elana Shohamy and Tim McNamara on critical language testing. Critical language testing focuses on the use and misuse of language tests, as well as on the intended and unintended consequences of tests on test takers and society. And Elana's book, The Power of Tests, which you see here, it's more than 20 years since it came out, but I think that this book has never been more important than right now, actually, with this new use and misuse of language tests that we see. So critical language testing is an approach that recognizes that tests are political tools and that tests are not value neutral. And this is in line with Masik's definition of validity. A critical approach as critical approaches in other fields, critical language testing and critical language testing research has an agenda for social justice and non-discrimination, and such brings a social-political perspective on testing. So this is a bit about my theoretical background for the choice of topic. The political background for my choice of focus in this presentation, as in the Impact Project, is the use, or what I would call misuse, of language tests as gatekeepers in the migration context, which we've seen in Europe over the past decades. In a European survey that I conducted with Lorenzo, Rocca and Patel in 2018, covering 41 of the then 47 Council of Europe member states, we found that while in 2007 relatively few European countries had language or cost requirements for citizenship, those are the dark blue countries, while in 2018 the picture was very different. Now almost all countries had language or cost requirements for citizenship. And since 2018, this has changed, as you know. Sweden is now also going to change this, probably. So in the survey, we also found that almost half of the 41 member states had cost requirements for residency or citizenship. And interestingly, in 9 out of 10 cases, these tests measuring knowledge of society, not language, because most countries have an additional language test, but the cost tests were provided almost always only in the majority language, hence representing an implicit de facto language test. As this table shows, I'm not going to go into detail on what the different tests measure and so on, but as you can see here, with very few exceptions, language tests are in the majority language only. And the only country providing cost tests in a multitude of minoritized languages was in fact Norway. And I will return to Norway in a little while, but first I will say a few words about the advantages of multilingual teaching and assessment. And I will focus on 2 parts of this. First, what I refer to as social justice, equity, and non-discrimination perspective, and that has already been brought up by the previous speakers. As stated in the UN resolution Transforming Our World, all people, including adult migrants, should have access to learning opportunities that help them to acquire the knowledge and skills that they need to exploit opportunities and to participate fully in society. This is also something that the Council of Europe has been focusing on since the beginning. So the Council of Europe and their Language Policy Division has promoted plurilingualism and the respect for linguistic diversity since its establishment, underlining the importance of recognizing language use as multilingual repertoire as a fundamental right of individuals. And through multilingual teaching and assessment, we can contribute to both valorizing and supporting learners' multilingual resources, as Giselle talked about the first day. And through that, creating a learning environment that recognizes and builds on the language and literacy repertoires that students bring to the school. This way, through multilingual teaching and assessment, we can contribute to counteracting native speakerism, monolingualism, and linguistic discrimination. And the other reason, which many language testers have pointed to already, has to do with validity. Because if you have a test that is supposed to measure knowledge of society is the construct of that test, and you do it through the majority language, that language is constructs irrelevant variance. And it's kind of surprising that this hasn't received more attention in the language assessment field, I think. So, as I mentioned, this cost test through the majority language only is a de facto language test, as McNamara and others have pointed to. Coming back to Norway then. Before 2017, as I mentioned, I would argue that we had a system in Norway that was quite exemplary. We had course and teaching and testing in many different first languages, in all the biggest migrant languages. So in 28 different languages plus Norwegian. We had a system of free language and cost courses for refugees and family reunited, and this has not changed. We still have that. We still have one of Europe's most generous systems when it comes to free language and cost courses. Before 2017, there was no language or cost test required for permanent residency or citizenship, only a requirement to follow these compulsory courses, both in language and in knowledge of society. And then something changed, and why did it change? And I think that the world, as it is today with the war in Ukraine, we might sometimes forget what happened in 2015, but I think we still remember the change that happened after 2015 and the war in Syria, where we had a double of refugees coming to Europe in 1 year. And in Norway, as in many other European countries, the response to this crisis was an introduction of stricter legislation both for immigration and for integration. The Norwegian coalition government, consisting of the conservative and progressive right-wing parties at that time, was exceptionally blunt about the reasons for tightening the legislation. They even wrote on the government webpage that they introduced these measures in order to make it less attractive to apply for asylum in Norway. And I mention this not to diss my own country, but because this is actually quite exceptional that a country is that open about their real agenda of gatekeeping purposes. It's much more common that policymakers justify these requirements by arguing that they lead to motivation or that they are necessary to motivate learners to want to learn the language, hence as a driver for integration. And these assumptions lack empirical underpinning, and several scholars have pointed to Norway and the Norwegian justification to keep migrants out as a real agenda for such requirements. So 2 of the measures taken by Norway was to introduce language and cost requirements both for permanent residency and for citizenship. For permanent residency, the language proficiency required was A1 oral production, so achievable for many learners. And the cost test that was required was the one provided in one of the 28 different languages, or in Norwegian if they wanted to take it in Norwegian. For citizenship, however, the language requirement was A2 oral, recently raised to B1, as many countries do once they have gotten the law passed. And the important point here for my presentation, they required that the cost test be passed not in one of the 28 minoritized languages, but in Norwegian. So what I wanted to investigate in this little study was how this impacted the system that we had of all of these different language tests. So firstly, I wanted to know if the cost requirement for citizenship impacted migrants' choice of language when they took the achievement test after the compulsory course. They could still take it in one of the 28 languages if they chose. But if they took it in Norwegian, they wouldn't have to take it again when applying for citizenship 6-7 years later. And I also wanted to see how this affected their pass probabilities. And I need to mention at this point that these are preliminary results based on not very, the data that I had was not linked to very many background variables. So we will continue to explore this further in the impact study using more sophisticated statistics and better data with more background variables. But I will show you some results. This graph shows the number of different languages that the cost test was administered in from 2015 to 2021. And you can very clearly see from this graph that the number of different test languages chosen by the migrants is declining. And that shift happened in 2017 when the language requirement, Norwegian language requirement, was introduced. And the same pattern emerges when we look at just the biggest languages, the biggest language groups that take the cost test in other languages than Norwegian. We see a pretty clear drop after 2017. But could this just be that all cost tests drop, or how does this relate to the percentages of tests taken in Norwegian? And here it becomes even more clear. And this, I think that this is something that many of those working with the tests in Norwegian, I think we've had like this assumption that this happens. But I think that these numbers show it quite clearly. So while in 2015, the large majority took the test in one of the many first languages, they now tend to take it almost exclusively in Norwegian. So does this change from multilingual cost test towards Norwegian cost test impact their chances to pass the test? And here I should have had better statistics, but I think this simple visualization shows something. These are again the biggest languages, and you see the pass scores from Somali to English. It's all between 75 and 86, and in 2021 it's actually higher for all languages. So if I add the Norwegian line here, you can see where that is in comparison. So for all languages except for the Somali group, it is easier to pass the test if you take it in your own language than if you take it in Norwegian. But remember that this is not the same candidates taking it in Norwegian and in COS, but still, sort of, it's an indication that there is something worth looking into here. And also, I looked at all the different languages to see if the chances of passing how many pass the COS test in L1 versus Norwegian. And these are the percentages of languages where more learners pass if they take it in first language versus in Norwegian. So both of these research questions were confirmed, you could say. It is a clear shift towards taking the test in Norwegian, and the probability of passing the test is lower if they take the test in Norwegian. But I want to just finish with a little bit of hope, perhaps. With the new integration law, it's not everything in that law that I would favor. But when it comes to the COS test, they have increased the number of hours that you are entitled to from 50 to 75 hours. They still stress that the tuition should be given in a language that a participant understands. And the new thing is that they say that this tuition should be given within 1 year instead of 3 years, which it has been. So we could think that within 1 year, they won't manage to learn Norwegian enough to take that test. So probably this could lead them back to taking it in their first language. And actually, we can already see in 2022 a slight reverse of these curves. Yeah. So to conclude, it appears that citizenship requirements and COS in Norwegian has undermined a good multilingual practice in Norwegian. Hopefully this will change a little bit. And as I said, you should take this data and the statistics for what it is, and we will continue to explore this in the impact project. And I just want to leave you with not one, but 3 little questions. Can it be justified to use a COS test in a majority language only? Is it legitimate at all to have COS and language tests as gatekeepers to entry, residency, and citizenship? And what are the consequences of these requirements on those affected by them? And the group that we are particularly interested in the impact project are the low literate learners that Lorenzo Rocca will talk more about in a minute. So if you want to know more about our project, you find our webpage there, or write to me. My email address is there, and we would be happy to to talk more about it. Thank you.
And you realize that I am not Lorenzo. Lorenzo isn't here. We believe he's in Argentina as we speak. But happily, he has sent us a video. And now everybody should cross at least one set of fingers and hope that this works.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and enjoy your Sunday in Helsinki. First, let me thank all you as participants and all the colleagues within the panel. And let me say that I'm very, very sorry not to be with you. I was really looking forward to the EALTA conference, and now I'm missing the event so much. Apologize so for my absence, but at least the video recording, I hope, could be a way to share something I consider important. So a multilingual assessment tool for migrants. This tool has a name, and the name is this acronym LAT, so LAMI LASLIAM Assessment Tools, an acronym that incorporates two other acronyms. LAMI is Language Assessment for Migration and Integration. It's a well-known EALTA SIG, so it's a special interest group within the EALTA Association. And since its foundation in 2002, LAMI represents the EALTA platform to allow that issues of test fairness within the migration context are addressed. The second acronym is more recent. It's related to a publication launched by the Council of Europe last June and stands for Literacy and Second Language Learning for LIAM, so for linguistic integration of adult migrants. LASLIAM is the new Council of Europe reference guide aimed at defining and scaling learning and teaching goals targeted to a very specific group of learners, very vulnerable group of learners, so who are facing the complex and, let me say, very demanding task of learning a language while either learning to read and write for their first time. LASLIAM has 4 main target users, curricula developers, teachers and authors, experts of teaching materials, language testers aimed at the production of assessment tools, and of course, portfolios for learners. But as you can see, there is something in brackets under assessment tools, only possible within the learning environment. I would introduce a fundamental approach you can find in LASLIAM chapter 6, fully dedicated to assessment, that we as co-authors highly support. So an approach that moves from the main difference between, on the one hand, CFR and its companion volume, on the other hand, LASLIAM. This difference, the shifting of the target learner from the CFR literate and generic social agent to the non or low literate migrant involved, in any case, in a formative path. It implies, this shifting implies that LASLIAM descriptors are learning goals that can usually only be achieved and so assessed as well only within a learning environment. By consequence, these goals cannot be seen as benchmarks to be achieved in designing stakes, large-scale, standardized tests like certification exams. After the validation of the 425 descriptors divided in 52 scales, we felt the need to pilot the scales in the sense to check to what extent the LASLIAM descriptors are really useful to develop teaching materials first, and second step, once developed these materials, if these tools are concretely useful with a well-functioning in classrooms, in real learning environments. So the piloting that led to different outcomes, to a good range of teaching materials, from learning units to exercises and tasks, from scenarios to specific activities focused on language strategies or digital competencies. But a good part of these tools is represented by assessment tools. And in this sense, EALTA played a central role. In a nutshell, LAT is a publication with 4 explanatory tools aimed, as said, to illustrate the use of LASIAM for assessment purposes. 19 LAMI members from 13 EALTA institutions, by representing 12 languages, were engaged in LAT. Well, the 4 tools, very briefly, we will focus a bit more on the first 2, but all the other 2 I would like to at least mention. Tool number 1, needs analysis plus a first half of placement, so an half related to oral dimension. Interview within the welcome phase, so at the very beginning of the learning path. An interview between the migrant and the teacher, volunteer, or experienced and a person from an NGO. It's important to say that this needs analysis covers all the 4 scales of LASIAM, as well as the placement, of course, according to a transversal view from LASIAM level 1, so the first level in the LASIAM scales, the level for total illiterate adult migrants, and to level 4, with its partial overlapping with the CFR A1. Then the second tool, again placement for the second half, so written dimension, reading and writing, again transversal, again from LASIAM level 1 to level 4. Then the last 2 tools, 2 different examples of end of course exam. In this case, tool number 3, an end of course at the end of LASIAM level 2, with tasks for all the 6 LASIAM overall scales, 1 task for each, 1 component for each scale, covering all the main skills. And then the last tool, another example of end of course exam, but a bit different, for instance, not related to LASIAM level 2, but in this case, the focus is on level 3, with its partial overlapping with CFR companion volume pre-A1, and it's adaptive in the sense that it's possible to adapt the 5 tasks with the total 14 closed items of reading to all the categories of the different way of reading, all the 5 specific scales provided by LASIAM for written reception. And transversal in the sense that it covers all the 4 domains of daily language use, so personal, public, occupational, and education. The process that led to LAT covered one year, more or less. We started last February. We ended last December with the final revision and qualitative validation that went on till mid-February of this year. Let me say few words more about the piloting. More than 100 teachers and 1,000 learners took part to the piloting, and in order to share feedback with the educators, we used in their classrooms LAT. 11 focus groups at European level were organized under the moderation of LAMI members. And the overall result was very positive. In particular, participants highlighted the need for tools like this, mentioning as most positive aspects the inclusive approaches and the suitability of the tasks for the specific learning audience. Well, I can easily state that translations made LAT a multilingual outcome. We have these 12 languages, and in this aspect, of course, LAT reflects and represents a concrete example of the second main EALTA mission from the EALTA homepage, so sustaining diversity. But we wanted really a bit more. Our aim was also to link LAT to the third mission, maximizing impact, thanks to, I would say, a multilingualism according to a vertical way. I'm referring to the utopia, maybe only utopia of the vertical syllabus. Yes, it's important to understand that LAT could be used in order to reduce the fragmentation, because all we know that, especially considering the high mobility of migrants, the learning process is often the result of multiple segments involving different operators and contexts, private, public schools, NGOs, educational, vocational, non-formal, formal, teachers, volunteers, and even, as said, different countries. So it's fundamental to achieve a mutual recognition of these different segments, linking the dropout in one learning environment with the drop-in another one. And LAT, according to a broader view, could be a concrete answer to these mutual needs, mutual teachers, learners, to make visible in a coherent, consistent way the achievement of learning objectives, as said, happened very often different times, places, and ways. We are talking about, as said, the perspective of a vertical syllabus, but to what extent it is possible? It's possible by considering that there are things that are learned just once. It implies that some skills can be transferred from one language to another, and very often, teachers at European level do not consider this aspect. I would like to mention the phonemic awareness, the technical literacy skills like copying, the recognition of letters, the decoding skills, some strategies. Let me give you an example according to, I call a balanced perspective, so a perspective that takes into account at the same time the functional literacy, so the view of literacy mainly as a social practice with a strong focus on the learner, but at the same time, the other part of the balance, a strong focus also on technical literacy with an orientation on the code. The reading task in this slide refers to LASIAM level 1 descriptor, so a goal at the end of the very first segment for a total illiterate. The descriptor says, in the bottom of the slide, can distinguish numerical from alphabetical information by recognizing some numbers and letters, recognizing, not by a reading comprehension, a full reading comprehension in the proper sense of the term. So the blue part is linked to the functional, the red part is linked to the technical, of course. And this is the first task out of the 12 composing the LAT tool number 2. So the placement, reading and writing, in this case, reading. Here the task is in its Italian version, sottolinea, underline, via. So same word in the same, with the same character, with the same dimension, and of course you can immediately do the task also in other languages. So for instance, stud in German, or street in English, or in Greek, or in Spanish. Why? Because it's not a matter of reading comprehension, it's a matter of letter recognition. The adopted approach of LAT in general is designed as a tool to support the concept of profiles and the recognition of partial competencies. In this sense, our tools allow users to illustrate the very often uneven profiles of our learners, providing evidence of what is really achieved. It implies that LAT should always lead to positive outcomes in order to sustain the motivation, and reminding that LASIAM scales are not intended to fix any cutoff point. And of course, according to this perspective, LAT is embedded in LOA, so with a strong attention, strong orientation to the learner and to its centrality. The structure of all the 4 tools is similar, with the same pattern. We start with the definition of the specific aims and listing the relevant LASIAM scales involved in each tool. Then we illustrate the format of the tasks, providing also detailed instructions and guidelines for the correct use, so addressing teachers and volunteers. Then we conclude with the presentation of the tasks, and we follow this presentation with the proposal of the suggested outcome based on the profiled approach aforementioned. Really 2 minutes for a final closer look to the specific aims to the first 2 tools, so the 2 LAT addressing the so-called welcome phase. Specific aims tool 1, to provide a broader language need analysis, first mainly containing questions in a language that learner knows, whatever language, not necessarily the target language, highlighting in this sense the importance of valuing his or her plurilingual repertoire. Then, only then, to present a more specific placement, diagnostic focus containing teacher turns in the target language, vertical way from level 1 to level 4, including also examples of possible learners' turns, so possible answers to better allow the teacher to place, to assess, according also to given scale, the performance. And then the specific aims of tool number 2, to provide the first part aimed at collecting evidences about the learner's literacy profiles in any language. So, for instance, in his or her first language of origin, in reading and writing, and then, only then, to present the placement as second parts through different tasks. With the component, each component with 3 tasks for written reception, production, and interaction in the same order for all the 4 LASIAM levels presented in progression. My conclusion is that in the spirit of the symposium, we as language testers, we need to broaden our horizons beyond the borders of our tests and beyond the borders of our language and our country as well. According to this need, LAT could represent an attempt in terms of practical answer given to vulnerable learners and aiming at sustaining the alignment between learning, teaching, and assessment, and supporting its recognition, the utopia of the vertical syllabus, according Europe. Of course, it would be hard to interact now, but please write me. I will be more than happy to share thoughts with you. Many thanks for the attention.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Barry to summarize very briefly what was, what has been said, and I hope we have still time for some questions, and we can stay here even during the coffee break for you.
I was actually planning to come up here and say it's almost impossible to summarize what we've just heard, because we're looking at literally a whole world of multilingual assessment and issues around it. I guess I do have some slides, but I'm not going to show them. But my single takeaway from all of this is, first of all, multilingualism is a reality, and it's a reality everywhere. It's not just something that has appeared either in the last 20 years. It's something that's always been there. It's something that testing has always managed to avoid. And it's something that we really do have to, as Lorenzo says it, and Elana has been saying it for many, many years, as Cecilie, of course. It's something that we have to take on head on and find practical solutions that work. And we found that the Israeli solution works. It looks like it works really well. It's a very elegant solution, a simple solution. Often the simplest solutions are the best solutions. I think listening to the roundabouts in Malaysia just is a concern, because it shows us that all of this work that we do is so ideologically driven and policy driven. Policy is driven by ideology, and unfortunately that's not easy to either predict or to control. It's certainly not in our position to control. But by advocating for change, you know, it took you 20 years, but it happened. You know, it might take the rest of us 20 years or more, but it can happen. I think in Cecilie's case, I'm really interested in it because I got interested in the tests for citizenship in the UK when I was there, because you could download tests and take them. I did it about 6 times, and I failed every time, because I don't really watch television, and I never studied English history. I can show you some examples of amazing questions with amazing language. One was, which country invaded the Falklands, comma, a British territory, in 1983? So that was the only question I could answer in that whole test as that. But it just shows you that these tests are, not only are they, I don't even see them as language tests, to be honest. I don't give them that much. They're an insult, because what is citizenship? What is knowledge of society? What is society? Because my lived society is completely different from my neighbours, where I live in Wexford, for example. You know, I have no interest in Gaelic games. I have no interest in Irish television. So I don't watch it. I don't follow the games. My neighbours come to me and say, did you watch the game on Sunday? And I have no idea what they're talking about. So we have different societies. So how can you, if you can't define something, you can't test it. And if you try to test it, it's an invalid test by definition. So it's not even a test. So, and then looking at how Lorenzo looks at it, which is a completely different way of thinking, taking it away back from the traditional standardized testing approach to an in-class approach. So we're looking at actually developing the people as people from the beginning, rather than focusing on developing, trying to make them like us. Like, that's the last thing you would ever want, I think. Now I've talked far longer than I wanted to talk, because I really think that we had an amazing group of people here today with some great presentations, and I'd really like to give you an opportunity now to ask them some questions about what they've been talking about. So if I can ask you guys to come to the front, please. Thank you. You're now allowed to move across.
Or the crossing.
Go for it.
In fact, you have to move across.
She told me not to.
Oh.
Emma, can
Before.
I?
Before.
Please,
Ah, here.
Oh.
Ah.
getting me in trouble.
I've already been in trouble.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentations. And as you all talked about changes over time, do you have any predictions in the kind of short term for where we will be in 4 or 5 years' time in your contexts?
Elana, you're first.
I think what you said about how it's driven by policy. Our country is going through a major crisis now in terms of division, big divisions, and trying to change our regime from democracy to who knows what. But some of it is to abolish even the Supreme Court. I mean, it's major thing for the past 5 months. In case you were busy with Trump or others, it's also happening there. So who knows? The situation in the world is so difficult now, but I think we have to try to bring, I think the danger is the children pay the price of these kind of populist views and so on. So where is it going? I'm never giving up. We were now turning to all kind of cities we decided to work on the level of the city and not in the level of governments, because governments, dangerous, they have military, all these things. So we are approaching a number of cities now. I mean, Anna herself is working in 2 cities, in Netanya and Bat Yam, which have lots of immigrants, and almost voluntarily, I mean, really to try to train teachers. Your dissertation is about it. And other people. We have a very committed group, but we have to move for a while, not to the big picture of a nation, but to smaller groups and show success there, and hopefully to get also the community going. When you show these results to the community, say, why do you do it? Oh, we don't do it because up there they didn't decide, the Ministry of Education, that should be abolished anyway, you know, what they come with because of their old views on everything. And it's the country changes, so education has to change. So I think I'm not too optimistic about what can happen on the national level. And as I said, I would like to move to communities. One of the things I didn't mention today is about the new multilingual policies, about communities, about engagement of teachers and other groups. This is our first chapter in the book also. And we believe in engaged language policy with communities. So along these lines, this is where we are going anyway.
I would like just to say just something small, that now working with the cities, I think it's a good thing that we don't have this big policy coming from the top, because I find that each school is different and we need to get a different approach in every school. So talking about policy, it's good that we don't have some strict policy, especially with the situation that we have many immigrants and refugees coming from Ukraine and Russia. So sometimes it's good not to have that huge policy, that we can use small policies in each school according to their own situation.
Mina, would you like?
Malaysia. That's a really good question, Jane. I honestly don't know, but what I would hope is that whatever policy they have, just see it through and support everybody who's implementing it. I know that policymakers always want things tomorrow and they want results now. I get that. But I kind of think, as Elana just said, think about the learners and the teachers. I would just like them to see it through and let school-based assessment, which is a thing at the moment, just settle and see how it works and see how people can be supported. But, I mean, 4 or 5 major changes in the last 20 years. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Yeah.
Cecilie. You knew your turn was coming.
What's going to happen? I don't know, but I do think it is that we have an important job, as I often talk about. I think that we, as language testers who know how the test will affect people, we know which groups will fail and which will not fail, and I think that we are the ones who need to engage with the inform the public opinion what it means, like in Sweden now, to inform the public, raise the debate. I mean, if there hasn't been enough writing in the Swedish newspaper about this, then I think that we as language testers are the ones who can do it. Ireland will be the only country without these requirements. So I think that, nothing will change unless we who know this stuff take a role of advocacy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's critical that people like you, people who are doing the actual research on the ground, are active in talking to media and talking to politicians. But I think I really like the idea of, rather than this concept of the top down, of the bottom up, get it working from the ground.
Teachers
and show some good examples and publicize those. I think that will catch up with other groups.
Yeah, and I think for me, I just hope that 4 years from now, Ireland will still be that single country that doesn't have these tests. And as far as I'm concerned, they won't, because I keep shouting as much as I can to stop it. Not that I have a big voice in Ireland.
Thanks very much. So talking about our response.
Just a second.
Okay.
Mike, Constable will bring you. have online attendance.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for that. You were talking about our responsibilities. Are you talking about our responsibilities as individuals, or is there also a role that associations like EALTA have to play in this? And if so, what?
Can I start with that, Penny? I think that's a really good question. I think there's. Thank you so much. I think that we as individuals can take responsibility, and I think there is a definite role for. Is that better? Okay, sorry. There is a definite role for associations, and I can speak for Malaysia, for example. We have associations in Malaysia that are very strong voices and do lots of great work and are advocates for good practice, both in assessment and wider English language teaching. I think where I would really like some support and would really like to do some work in the area is how do we then convey that to the people who make the decisions? And I know we've been talking about it for a long time, but particularly in countries like Malaysia, I think that's so, so important. So yes, I think there is work for us as a community and individuals to do, but then conveying that, translating that, and helping people who make the decisions listen and act upon that, I think is a different thing. That's what
I also definitely think that organizations like EALTA and EALTA have a role to play. I don't know if any of you replied to a survey that I had out in March. I think I posted it everywhere and got around like 350 questions and replies. And one of the things that people said that there is a need for the big organizations to train us in advocacy. That was like really a lot of language testers said that they feel a responsibility that their test shouldn't be misused, but they sort of lack the training of how to go about it, which is what Tim said years ago. So, and if I could also just mention that the work that we're doing in EALTA now, the Association of Language Testers in Europe, that Lorenzo was representing in a way. I think many of you know about the audit system that we have in EALTA, where we have 17 minimum standards that organizations that want to be full members of EALTA have to put their tests forward and be evaluated on all of these 17 minimum standards, which is a validation argument, really. And we've been working now for the last year to include an 18th minimum standard about preventing test misuse. And we were a little bit surprised that we managed to get it through because you know that in EALTA there are big companies selling tests like Cambridge, Goethe, etc. And there are a lot of organizations or test developers working for the government. But I'm very happy that we managed to get it through with the support of the members and the standing committee and the executive committee, that we will have an 18th minimum standard that all test developers will have to sort of relate to. Doesn't mean that you can necessarily prevent test misuse, but you have to be conscious about the possibility and do what you can to prevent it. And there are things that can be done, of course, so yeah.
No question in my mind. I mean, these organizations have to play a major role. There's no question. Even with LTRC, remember with the pilot tests, you know, we were very successful in kind of changing the test of, they were sued or something, the pilot test, I don't remember what the end of it was, and which, you know, the use of people did not know the language on one of the flights to Colombia, the crash. But anyway, the test that they were giving was problematic, and, you know, and I don't know what was the end of it, I don't remember now. But Charles Anderson was very active in that, and so I think you could see success stories here and there. And I think we have to take that role. I mean, it's the same way that when we do a study, I don't believe you can end where we ended now, that the results are on the shelf. I mean, we have to make sure as researchers, I feel that this is the most important thing for us, that every results of any research that shows some harm to society, or it can be done better, should be pursued, and we should pursue it. And this is why, when we were asked by Steve May to write this special issue, Pete Van Everett and myself, where Cecilie has an article and some of the others, it's important. And all, like you said, all the examples were, when we take the role, we have to be successful, and we should not stop with just doing our published article. All our papers we talked about are published, even what we talk. But it's what does it mean? How many people read their published article, you know? So I think there is a role for us, no question in my mind, to not see ourselves as researchers, but as advocates and activists and whatever.
Well, I obviously support everything that's been said, and I worked a lot with Micheline Chalub-Deville over the last number of years, and she's been talking about us learning how to communicate with policymakers for years, and it's something that in our profession we're sadly lacking. It's very obvious to me. And in our validity book 2020, we actually have a model of validity which is placed in context, with the context defined by the people who make up that context. It's all about people. And I think when we talk about our research, we are exceptionally good at speaking to each other. We're really good. We come to the conferences, we talk to each other in our own language, in our own way. We really need to learn how to talk to other people. And validity for me is way beyond a Toulmin argument-based approach. Validity for me is talking to anybody out there on the street about how our tests work or how they don't work. We can't do that the way we currently do it. We have to learn how to do it in different ways. So to answer the question, I think it's our individual responsibility, but it's also our collective responsibility to try to make things happen.
I want to say something about our universities. We all work at universities that are very misusing tests, because there is one test that they're using for entrance, so everything is being taught in one language. Now, so those kids, the immigrants, right away have to do it in Hebrew at the university. What other chances? Same thing with the Arabs. I mean, it's the same thing. They study everything in Hebrew. They studied all their lives in Arabic, and now it's changing. So our universities, it's like so close to home. We have to be influential of admission committees and things like that, of the kind of test they're using. So let's not forget where we live and where we reside most of our days. Go ahead, sorry.
Just to add to what I was saying about helping policymakers understand what we have to say, I think, and I take this as an individual responsibility, understanding policy literacy, understanding their environment and understanding how they make their decisions. I think it's a two-way thing as well. And I think Dagers and Malone wrote a paper in 2019 about universities in Belgium where they investigated this exact thing. And I see it as a two-way thing, Benny. I really do. I do think we have a responsibility to kind of meet them halfway as well.
Right, it looks like we're running out of time, so I'm going to put all of these lads on the spot now by asking them to summarize your thoughts in one sentence. And sorry, Elana, it's an irregular, average sentence, not an Elana Shohamy. But I will ask you to start.
Okay, I think in these difficult times that we're going through, not just in Israel, not just here, but around the world, it's a major crisis and major change, and we should just not give up and continue working and trying to move things and not demonstrate like we do a lot now, and try to make this place a better world and think positively.
I just over these days, it's just become so clear to me how important it is to have this kind of community of supports. And one little insight from that survey that I had out among language testers across the globe, I also asked, is there one person that you could mention that has been important to you as a professional? And Elana's name came up a lot, which I think is a really good sign for the future of this community.
So for me, working with schools, many times when they invite me first time, they tell me something isn't working here. We need something different. So I really believe that there is a time for a change for students who come from different cultural and linguistic background in their schools. It should be acknowledged, and they should get the education that is right for them and correct to their age, because some of them are just sitting there and not getting the proper education. So that's what I summarize. There is a time for change.
Oh my gosh, where to start? I know this conference is about assessment, but kind of just thinking about Malaysia, assessment doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Kids kind of are in a learning environment where they have so many variables to contend with. And I know I keep banging on about policymakers, but I think at the heart of everything we do, I just hope that we constantly keep those young people at the center of what we do, because they are our future.
And I'm just going to finish by thanking EALTA for giving this great panel an opportunity to present this morning. So thank you, EALTA, and thank you all for coming this morning, and thanks most of all to you lads, and to Lorenzo up there. We know he might be in Argentina, but he's thinking of it. So thank you very much.